Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the briefing room. I am your host, Awoowe Hamza. In the late 1980s, Somalia was in a full-fledged civil war, and by 1991, the government collapsed, including all national institutions. Now, at that time, a large percentage of Somalis moved abroad and they needed to support their families back home. In the absence of a central bank and a financial infrastructure, there was a vacuum and a market gap to be filled. And this is where the Somali money transfers, or remittance companies, come in. They allowed Somalis all over the world to send money back home to their families. So what has happened in the last 20 or so years in regards to the remittance industry? Several money transfer companies were started up by Somali entrepreneurs all over the world to provide these services, of which Dahab Shil and Al Barakat were arguably the most popular. Dahab Shil has been operating since the 1970s, but more and more companies began to enter the market over a period of 10 years. Then, in 2001, Al Barakat was shut down by the US authorities because of allegations that they funded Al-Qaeda's attack on the Twin Towers. These charges were later dropped when it was found that an interbank wire transfer to the SunTrust Bank in Florida was used to fund the attack. So it wasn't Al Barakat at all. Since then, several external events impacted the remittance industry and got us where we are today. In 2008, the US designated Al-Shabaab, the military offshoot of the Union of Islamic Courts, as a terrorist organization. In 2010, 14 Somali Americans were charged with sending money to Al-Shabaab, and Barclays was fined nearly $300 million for facilitating money transfers to Iran and Cuba. Then 2 years after that, Barclays pays another fine, $453 million this time, and HSBC pays nearly $2 billion for money laundering for Mexican drug cartels. And this is all happening concurrently with many US banks deciding to shut down the accounts of Somali remittance companies. Then in December 2011, the last bank to offer services to Somali remittance companies, Sunrise Community Bank, closes the remittance company's accounts as well. Several months later, Somalis in Minnesota campaign and they boycott these banks because they've essentially prevented them from legally sending money back home to their families. Now, during this time period, as this was all unfolding in the US, fines totaling more than $7 billion by the US government pressured banks to re-evaluate the remittance industry. And what happens in the United States will eventually trickle down to the United Kingdom, and several UK banks began closing accounts as well. Earlier this year, US Bank agreed to reopen one of the accounts for Dahab Shil, proving that the campaigning of the Somalis in Minnesota paid off. However, a few months later, Barclays, the last bank that offered bank accounts to Somali remittance companies in the UK, just like the Sunrise Community Bank in the US, announced that they are closing down the accounts. Now, the announcement at first didn't reach many people, but it slowly picked up traction in the media.
International money transfer service Dahab Shil wants Barclays Bank to put off plans to close several money transfer accounts that provide a lifeline to millions of Somalis for another 12 months. The company, alongside Oxfam, Care and 7 other aid agencies, maintain that cutting off this service will deny millions of Somalis their lifeline, as many depend on remittances from abroad, and that the period will allow time for consultations and development of a practical solution.
With barely 19 days to go, millions of Somalis are yet to find an alternative money transfer service to receive financial support from relatives abroad. Should Barclays make good their plan to close several money transfer accounts used in Somalia? The bank wants to disassociate itself from any system that could be used to finance terrorist activity in the country that is just lifting itself from years of war and a piracy-ridden coast along the Indian Ocean. But why look for an alternative, maintain users of the service, when, according to them, there is nothing wrong with the service mostly rendered through Dahab Shil in Somalia?
We are licensed in the UK, we have never been accused, we have never been charged anything against the law of the UK, and we are fully compliant with the UK regulations, and we're happy to do anything the UK government requires to us.
On Wednesday in London, a 15,000 signature petition was presented to the British Prime Minister, pleading for government intervention.
So why is Barclays doing this? What are the reasons that they are citing, that they say that they are closing down the accounts for?
By law, the money transfer shops need to hold a recognised bank account. Many opted for Barclays. But the bank is now closing some accounts down for fear it could be held responsible for cash reaching the wrong places. In a statement, Barclays said some of the money shops don't have the proper checks in place to spot criminal activity and could unwittingly be facilitating money laundering and terrorist financing. The bank said it nevertheless remains happy to serve companies who have strong anti-financial crime controls, but are asking the others to find another bank. For their part, the money transfer shops insist they have a long record of complying with all the financial rules here. The network, with the biggest number of branches in the UK and Somalia, is called Dahabshil, a word which, roughly translated, means gold merchant.
We are licensed by Financial Conduct Authority. We have been regularly audited by Her Majesty Custom and Excise. We have been regularly audited by Barclays Bank themselves. We have been in business for 15 years. We have resources and system to deal with anti-money laundering and financial systems. And we are asking them to work with us.
In a statement, Barclays said it is recognised that some money service businesses don't have the necessary checks in place to spot criminal activity with the degree of confidence required by the regulatory environment under which Barclays operates.
Since then, the community began campaigning more and more, and the earlier petition being given to the Prime Minister of 15,000 signatures, which included a Change.org petition started by Farhan Hassan, as you can see, has since increased to over 100,000 signatures. This has also meant that Barclays has responded to the online petition, saying, "Two recent reports highlight why it's become even more important for us to take immediate action. In their recently published annual financial crime report, our regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, drew attention to the heightened money laundering risks, with the sector being at particular high risk of abuse by those seeking to launder money or finance terrorism. And some money services businesses have been seen to be complicit in these activities. In addition, a report by the Monitoring Group on Somali and Eritrea to the UN Security Council on the 12th of July 2013 highlights the financial crime risks in relation to terrorist financing." The problem with this statement, though, is that Barclays announced that they were closing down the accounts months before the Monitoring Group's report came out. I mean, it came out in July, but on the 8th of May, Dahabshil was informed of the closure of their accounts by Barclays, and they were given 2 months' notice until the 10th of July. Now, between the 28th and 24th of June, several things happened. Mark Simmons, the UK Africa Minister, gave a speech at the Barclays Africa Forum, but he didn't mention the remittance issue at all. And then, SOAS lecturer Dr. Laura Hammond contacted over 100 academics and activists to start a campaign and to co-sign a letter to be sent to the FCO. When I got the email, I'll be very honest, I was a little annoyed. I'm truly grateful for Dr. Laura Hammond to reach out to all of us to highlight the issue. But what was more concerning was the fact that the Somali remittance companies did not do this themselves. They didn't reach out to the Somali community to get behind them on this matter. And it doesn't matter what political affiliations you have. It doesn't matter from what part of the Somali Peninsula you come from. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are. Everybody sends money back home. Everyone. If there was ever an issue that would and could unite the Somali community, a particular point where everyone would be on the same page, it would be the need to continue to allow Somali remittance companies to operate so that we can all continue to send money back home. Yes, I agree. This was never meant to be a long-term solution. But right now, we need the remittance companies. On the 24th of June, the FCO acknowledged the receipt of the letter championed by Dr. Laura Hammond and held a meeting with representatives from the Home Office, the HM Treasury, the Revenue and Customs Office, Syria's Organised Crime Agency, and DFID to consider in detail the issue of Somali remittances. Now, on the same day, several major media outlets began printing articles about the issue. I mean, it was finally getting the media attention it needed. And this included papers like the BBC, it included papers like The Guardian, it included The Independent, who did a piece on it as well, and so too did BizTech. But they weren't the only ones. I mean, Olympic gold medalist Mo Farah did an interview with ITV, and said that his extended family will struggle if Barclays goes ahead with plans to shut systems that allow money transfers to accounts in the Somali Peninsula. Here's the clip.
A year ago, Mo Farah lit up the Olympic Stadium, winning a double gold. But today it's a precious money issue that's weighing him down.
Race tomorrow?
Yeah, that should be exciting.
Like many British Somalis, he relies on a transfer service to send cash back home, but it's about to be closed by Barclays Bank with devastating consequences.
I worry about it a lot because, you know, it's affecting my family, it's affecting a lot of people, it's affecting kids, it's affecting my charity.
07.
This is Dahabshil, a British company that allows money to be sent to Africa. It's fast, reliable and a legal way of transferring cash.
How important is it for people back in Somalia to receive money?
It's really important because, you know, like myself, like I've got my family still back there and I support my brother's kid. You know, for me the only way I can send money is by using Dahabshil, and if it was without Dahabshil, we can't send any money, so it's going to affect so many people's lives. It will definitely get worse, 100%. There's no question. And it's definitely going to affect people's lives, and it is sad, and I think something needs to be done about it.
The Somali president followed suit and issued a press release, urging Barclays to reconsider closing down the accounts of these remittance services and work together with them and the UK government on finding a solution. Now, 46 UK MPs wrote a letter to Barclays urging them to keep their accounts open as well. And the deadline for the 10th of July fell at the same time as Ramadan, when the Somalis back home are even more in need of the remittance money sent by Somalis abroad. I mean, the Somali remittance companies were then given an extension to the 12th of August, which was for close to Eid, and a few weeks later, this was then extended until the 30th of September, when that deadline came and the issue couldn't be resolved. Dahabshil took Barclays to court, and Barclays extended the deadline for Dahabshil only until the day of the court case. Now, the court date was set for 16th of October, the day after Eid. Again, it's around a time when Somalis send more money than usual to their families back home. So what is it that could be an alternative to these remittance services?
But Mariam, why is it the banks such as Barclays are looking at this as the only option? Is this perhaps going to reduce money laundering?
Well, that's what many experts are asking. You know, this could actually lead to what we call shadow banking and more illegal money laundering as people become desperate, really, to get money across. Certainly, aid organizations will have to look for alternative ways, perhaps setting up a transfer to the Somali government.
Setting up a transfer to the Somali government to funnel the money through. Look, it's pretty simple. In theory, anyway. We need the Somali remittance services right now. In the long term, these companies should set themselves up as regulated banks back home and help rebuild the Somali financial infrastructure. But I'm afraid that if this continues, non-Somali commercial banks will quickly fill the gap, as they have done in South Sudan. And we won't be in control of our economy much more either. The discussion continues, and we'll find out shortly what has happened regarding the court case. I mean, in the meantime, please make sure to attend Somali Week at Oxford House in East London, where they will have several days of discussions, entertainment and debates. They will also cover the remittance issue on Monday the 21st of October. Obviously, if you haven't been able to go there, then perhaps you can still see it on video. Where they had a panel to discuss alternatives, and they had a Q&A session. I mean, all in all, it's happening in the US, it's happening in the UK. My suggestion to Somalis in the rest of Europe, in countries such as the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Norway and Germany, start preparing for this as well. Be proactive in ensuring that the Somali remittance companies can still operate in your country, and learn from the mistakes here in the UK and the US. I mean, the UK government right now has said that they will provide a safe corridor for transfer companies to be able to do this. But they won't be able to do this until another 12 months from now. So it's our current fight, our campaign, still continues. Well, we at least try to get Barclays to extend the deadline for another 12 months. That provides us the time that we need, really. The time that we need to be able to set up alternatives. But that was it for now. Make sure you join us in the second half, where we talk about the Somali image in the media and the needs that we have for a proper PR team. Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm your host, Awoowe Hamza. There's a need for us to be changing ideologies and challenging the way that we think. Not the quickest and best way of doing that, and the reason why I wanted to do this show, is through the media. And we have to look at what role the media plays in society. I mean, when we look at our Somali society, we have over 30 Somali TV, radio, and internet outlets. And we have lots of smaller, privately owned ones as well. And a stream of information coming through them. But how many of our generation actually actively watch those channels? I mean, we tend to go to Al Jazeera, BBC, RT, Sky News. Sometimes we don't even have to go that far. We just go on social media to see what news articles and videos others have shared. So I ask myself, do we trust our media? Do we trust them to be impartial, to give us the type of information that we need, to feed us the type of analytical and intellectual debates that we are accustomed to? Not just accustomed to, that we are hungry for. Or do we go to RT, MSNBC, and Al Jazeera for that? We have to look at the role our media plays and how we can change that to change our landscape. The media is the easiest way to disseminate information. The public influences the news, and the news influences the public, and this is what makes it so dangerous. And the same applies to the UK and the international media. The way that we are portrayed in the media is the perception the general public will have of us. So we have to be careful of our image. But for years now, newspapers and TV stations have constantly put out negative stories about the Somali community, and there hasn't really been anyone to challenge it. And we have to look at what people say, or the people who constantly say that they represent us and our views. I mean, do they really? We have so many people who appear in the media and say, we represent the Somali people. We represent the ones who have suffered. Or, my personal favourite, you'll see a 40-year-old man on TV who says, I represent the youth. We see it all the time. So what do we do to change that? They are usually as dangerous to our image as they help distort the truth. And the only way we can change that is to not only hold ourselves to account, but also our brothers and sisters. And that's a part of the role of the media. They can help keep our so-called representatives to account by interviewing them, by researching and asking the difficult questions. We need people who can defend our reputation in the media. Let me give you an example. Recently, The Economist wrote an article titled, Britain's Somalis, the road is long. Now, I'll give them credit for writing Somalis instead of Somalians and getting that right, but that's all I'm giving them credit for. The Economist, when they usually write articles, they usually try to make them balanced, and they're a pretty reputable organization. But they still went on to publish an article that totally demonized the Somali community. A group of young Somali professionals then, after reading the article, decided to send a reply to The Economist in response to the article. And I was honored enough to have been part of the discussions and the drafting of the response to The Economist. And this was then sent to The Economist for their response. You can find the first part of the response on the website of Howard's Haven. The response covered how the article sounded very biased and how the article included accents of Eurocentric, racist, and even classist propaganda. I mean, honestly, I was truly surprised. I mean, whilst reading, many of us were thinking that we could easily replace the term Somali for Irish if this was the 19th century, or the term Somali for Jew if you were in the 1940s, or even change it for black if this was the 1950s. The article was quite poorly researched, and the writer failed to distinguish between economic migrants and refugees. I mean, it included claims that Somalis are Britain's largest refugee population, whereas according to the UNHCR Asylum Trends 2012 report, Somalis do not even make the top 10 list of asylum seekers in the UK. At the outset, the photograph in the article showing Somali woman holding a Somali flag outside the UK border is used to portray Somali women as a symbol of what The Economist falsely claims is wrong with Somalis in Britain, namely that they do not belong here, that they are all immigrants, refugees. Actually, the photograph was taken during the London 2012 Olympic Games, and the Somali women were photographed at Heathrow Airport welcoming the Somali Olympic team to London. It's obvious what the reader was trying to do. He was trying to, or she was trying to, manipulate the reader's perception Through the use of this photograph, the writer continued making statements such as, Somalis are amongst the poorest, worst educated and least employed in Britain, and the pitiful employment rate amongst Britain's Somalis, without offering any balance or context to this claim. There's not enough research on Somalis to have the type of data to back this claim up. Now, aside from this article, another example is the new Captain Phillips movie out by Tom Hanks. The movie has several Somali actors in it, and whilst I agree that it's good for these Somali actors because they are starting their Hollywood careers, and we have to keep in mind that Hollywood is hardly balanced in their depiction of Somalis. I mean, we remember that from Black Hawk Down. But just because we remember that, it doesn't mean that a discussion can't be had on the contents of the film and how we are portrayed. Channel 4's Jamal Osman went to ask the director of the film about this, and here you can see what happened next.
Jamal Osman reporting. Well, he's with us now. He is Somali by birth, and we're joined by the film's director, Paul Greengrass, and its star, Tom Hanks. Thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Jamal, why don't you ask?
Yeah, I mean, as a filmmaker, it was a good watch, quite tense, some terrific scenes, I would say. But as a Somali, I feel you demonized us as Somalis. And since this film is based on a true story, don't you think you have the obligation to represent the subject or the society in question fairly?
Well, you won't be surprised to know I don't accept that. But more to the point, what is interesting is we had in this film, I would say probably about 30 or 40 Somalis who took part in it, including the four young men who played the pirates. And we cast that way precisely because I wanted to have that perspective. Not one of them felt that. And I must take issue with one of your points in your film. You know, I don't agree at all with your analysis that Somali piracy today is fishing communities striking back at overfishing in their waters. That's where it began. And I think if you look at any of the studies done on piracy, any of the reputable studies, and I can point you to probably a dozen or more, they'll all tell the same story. That was what happened in the 80s and the early 90s. Overfishing in Somali waters, toxic waste dumping too, and fishing communities fighting back. But very, very quickly, this became international organized crime, with crime bosses moving in, financing these communities, financing them, entire communities, who then began to reap the rewards of this piracy. So I think, with respect to you, that your assertions are not borne out in fact, and actually are rather romantic ones.
Well, I've seen the film, and it is a sensational watch, no question at all.
The presenter just jumped in. I mean, did you see that? Jamal didn't even get a chance for his rebuttal against the claim the director made about Jamal's documentary. I mean, he was just being lectured. And if you notice the body language of the presenter, he is totally turned away from Jamal when he jumps in, and it stays like this for the second half of the interview. I mean, Jamal isn't allowed to get a single word in after that. But still, I like how Jamal stood up for the Somali community and was honest about his feelings that this film partly demonizes the Somali community, and he tries to hold the director to account. The problem is, we can't have specific individuals do this on an ad hoc basis. What we need is a proper PR group that we can put people forward for to respond to all the negative media representations of the Somali community. We need to set up a group that protects our interests in the media. Another example of an article written that unnecessarily portrays Somalis in a negative light is by The Voice. I mean, this newspaper used to be a leading black newspaper in the UK that fought for the right of black people in the UK since it was founded in 1982. But The Voice published an article titled, "Syria makes Barack Obama look like a Somali refugee." I mean, this wasn't an article that was looking into the Somali community at all. It was an article that reviewed President Obama's actions on Syria. But there was a single statement in the article which created the title itself. And the writer states, "Obama had to run to Congress to beg them to back him. That don't look good on any president, but on the first black president, it's worse. It makes him look like a Somali refugee." That single comment was the only thing that made the writer choose the title. For a leading black newspaper to allow an article to be published that attacks another black community like it did, It's irresponsible of the editors, and they should have withdrawn it and publicly apologized for it. But again, we didn't have a group that protects our interests in the media that could pressure them to do this. So The Voice, like The Economist and many other media organizations, are free to write whatever they want about the Somali community because they know that there's nobody to represent them and stand up for them. And this has to change, my brothers and sisters. This truly has to change. We need to come together and collectively agree that we will create a group that will respond to these type of published articles and interviews. Without effective PR, we will continue to be demonized and taken advantage of. If something happens that involves the Somali community, like the Westgate attack, for example, and the newspapers and the TV stations are all scrambling to get quotes from every so-called leader or influential Somali person, we should all refer them to this particular group that we can then create for any quotes or press releases. We should be united in our voice. That was it for tonight. I'm your host, Awoowe Hamza, and thank you for watching The Briefing Room.